Mrs. Dalloway. In addition to writing fiction and essays, Virginia Woolf also ran the Hogarth Press, that published T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, and rejected James Joyce's massive stream of consciousness opus Ulysses due to length. Because of this work, Woolf had intimate contact with the experimental literature of her day. Her novel Mrs. Dalloway is a kind of response to Ulysses that attempts a similar project, depicting the consciousness of a few characters over a 24-hour period. However, Woolf's representation is much shorter, less self-indulgent perhaps. Thus, like Joyce's Ulysses and Eliot's The Waste Land, Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway participates in the modernist experimentation to represent the world as it really is. Where Eliot accomplishes this representation of the real, using fragmented poetry and themes of devastation related to the disillusioned world after World War I, Joyce and Woolf use stream of consciousness narration to emphasize that reality occurs in the mind. Narrative experiments with stream of consciousness draw upon developments in science, including the work of psychoanalysts like Sigmund Freud, who proposed that the individual psyche is fragmented, composed of both conscious thought and unconscious impulses, and the work of Albert Einstein, whose theories of relativity asserted that data is impacted by the position of the observer. A perhaps less well-known scientist influencing stream of consciousness narrative was Henri Bergson, who theorized a difference between clock time and experience time, accounting for moments that seem to fly and moments that seem to drag. The impact of science on the arts can be seen easily in the shift from realist painting through Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, and Cubism. John Constable's work is realistic in that it uses traditional techniques of representing a three-dimensional landscape in two dimensions. Traditional techniques assume that an objective reality exists, and that the painter should represent that reality from a single perspective, from which anyone viewing that scene on that day would see it the same way. Thus, realist painting has a responsibility to accuracy, an obligation to represent the scene as it was. Impressionist art, like Renoir's, moved more toward depicting objective reality through the painter's perception, particularly in relation to light. Thus, each individual's perspective might register reality differently. Post-Impressionism began to address reality as defined by multiple perspectives. The Cézanne painting Ginger Jar provides an example of this. Notice that the cloth falling over the edges of the table actually divides one plane of the table from another. The one on the left is tipped more toward the viewer, and the other is more horizontal. Planes among the items on the table and between the table and the background are also skewed. This use of multiple perspectives represents the different ways individuals, and even the same individual, can see the scene. In a sense, reality thus becomes less solidly objective than one might expect. The use of multiple perspectives to define reality is taken further in Cubism. Notice the multiple planes that are emphasized in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Also, notice that the crouching woman's head seems twisted on her body. This reminds us that what we know about reality comprises more than just the part that faces us. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon also emphasizes realistic content in the sense that the women depicted are prostitutes, rather than the wealthy women who might sit to have their portraits painted. Also, their importance in the image is reduced by the fact that the air around them is also filled with planes. One might compare this kind of an image to a story with multiple main characters, where the concept is the focus, rather than an individual hero overcoming conflict. Stream of consciousness narration participates in this artistic development. Writers employ stream of consciousness to capture the reality of characters' lived experience as a continuous flow, with information coming through the senses, mingled with thoughts and memories. This style employs free association and juxtaposition rather than logic or chronology, and may use multiple genres. This causes a stylistic fragmentation of the narrative, often reflected in the way words are combined and the use of punctuation. Fragmentation makes these texts difficult to read. However, as with Eliot's The Wasteland, this difficulty also gives readers plenty of power in interpreting the meaning arising from the juxtaposition of fragments. The techniques of stream of consciousness narration are: direct interior monologue, which reflects a character's thoughts without using he thought; indirect interior monologue, which reflects a character's thoughts using he thought; camera style sequences such as fade-outs, flashbacks, and montage; typographical controls including punctuation signals like italics, parentheses, dashes, commas, and ellipses; discontinuity including fragmented sentences, repetition, and impressionistic use of metaphors that evoke emotional rather than literal understanding; and cohesive aids, such as Aristotelian unities of time and space, such as a novel set on a single day, and repeated metaphors and images, such as the tolling of the clock tower, Big Ben. Other qualities of modern fiction include alienated characters who attempt to figure out what to do with their lives. This is more akin perhaps to our own real lives than heroes who seem to automatically know the foe they must conquer or the journey they must make. More than one main character de-emphasizes the importance of the single heroic individual, and perhaps also emphasizes instead the meaning of the design. Settings tend to be urban, as the city is more associated with modern life. Trivialities dominate descriptions and events, which again connects with the real. There is little objective narration. The narrator arranges the information we receive, but doesn't provide much physical description or comment much on the events. Instead, we get our understanding of reality through the perspectives of the characters. This technique emphasizes the philosophy that we can't know reality except through individual perception. Plots tend to be nonlinear in order to better reflect the lack of traditional plot in real life. Action is anticlimactic and fragmented. Texts avoid a kind of artistic fascism where the consensus of the plot resolution suggests life can be understood easily. Instead, endings are ambiguous and lacking closure, indicating the uncertainty of life. The tone tends toward the ambiguous or ironic, and the narrative is often self-reflexive in that it calls attention to itself as a narrative, or by commenting on narrative or art in general. Woolf herself theorizes about the philosophy underpinning her use of stream of consciousness narratives in modern fiction. I like the visual quality of both these images. Life is not a series of jig lamps symmetrically arranged, but a luminous halo, a semi-transparent envelope surrounding us from the beginning of consciousness to the end. Let us record the atoms as they fall upon the mind in the order in which they fall. Let us trace the pattern, however disconnected and incoherent in appearances, which each sight or incident scores upon the consciousness. This lecture will continue in Part 2.